Sanje Chedang Sui Chi Cho Nam La Chandro Bado Dani Chap Su Chi Dagi Jinzo Jipe Sanam Ji Rula Pinchi Sanje Rupa Sanje Chedang Sui Chi Cho Nam La Chandro Bado Dani Chap Su Dagi Jinzo Jipe Sanam Ji Rula Pinchi Sanje Drupaj Sanje Chedang Sui Chi Cho Nam La Chanjo Bado Dani Chap Su Chi Dagi Jinzo Jipe Sanam Ji Rula Pinchi Sanje Drupaj Paden Save Lama Ramboji Dagi Jiwo Peme Den Shula Kadin Chembo Gene Jizande Kusan Tujina Seldu Sashi Puso Sashi Meta Jari Rablinji Jampa de Sanji Shingdu Minda Puai Rukan Nangla Jinla Chupai Sanji Namche Sambada Loye Jita Jita Chichong Tumong Tekpai Chichi Kolo Kodu So. Okay, so good morning to everybody. In Shantideva's chapter on the perfection of effort, which His Holiness has been teaching us, there's a very vivid verse concerning how to overcome laziness, in which Shantideva says, I'm paraphrasing, "Why sleep now, you fool? Don't you see that the Lord of Death is roaming around looking to kill you?" I've always found this a very powerful verse. And last night, thanks to the music and baseball and whatever was being played at that side of Kibi in another institution, I was able to meditate on that extensively till about 4 o'clock in the morning. So if this morning I suddenly slip into another dimension, it won't be because I've achieved realization. It will be because I can't stay awake. So obviously the teaching didn't completely work on me. That our friends kindly helped me to try to meditate on last night. So my apologies in advance for that. So we return to Jamgon Control Lodra Thaye's text, the guide to meditating on the Shentong Madhyamaka view, or the great Madhyamaka view. And as you remember, we still in the section called What is to be Understood. And here, Control Lodra Thaye has explained to us that in terms of developing, so to speak, a readiness to realize the Shentong view, at least intellectually speaking, then we can approach it from 2 directions, or in 2 ways. Firstly, if we have an affinity with the common Madhyamaka school, then we can go through the teachings on emptiness taught there, in order that we will cut through clinging to conditioned phenomena which presently surround the Buddha nature, but cut through clinging to them as truly existent. Having then meditated on that through the meditation beyond mental activity, we're ready to be introduced directly to the Buddha nature teaching. That was one approach, so we went through that. The second Controller Thaye described as being for those who have an affinity with the Yogacara. As he explained yesterday, this is the system presented particularly by the Bodhisattva Maitreya in his 5 Dhammas, so his 5 great texts, especially the Jude Lama, the Supreme Continuity. And even if we follow this way, first of all, we have to, once again, first cut off clinging to conditioned phenomena, the 5 skandhas, internal and external, as having any intrinsic nature. If we cannot follow the elaborate presentation of this in Maitreya's texts, then Controller Thaye explained to us yesterday the meditation which very strongly resembles, as I pointed out, the Lojong ultimate bodhicitta meditation, where we first of all dissolve clinging to external phenomena or phenomena that we think are external to our mind by realizing they are dreamlike and nothing more than the activity of mind, and then cutting through clinging to the mind itself, the subject as being truly existent. So in that way, the whole framework of the dualistic perspective, which is at the root of our ignorance, of course, is dissolved. So we'd reached that point yesterday, and we just had a little bit more to do in this section. So he's ended up by saying not only objects, but the so-called perceiving consciousness, they're primordially empty, like sky, flowers. And now he introduces the Buddha nature view. As he says, the intention of Maitreya's teaching is as follows. So intention here means like the essential point that Maitreya's teaching are leading us to realize, the essential point to be realized. The intention of Maitreya's teaching is as follows. One should recognize the primordial wisdom of the emptiness of subject and object in this manner, as we've just done yesterday. Then, so at that point, after that, one should settle in the true nature of reality that pervades everything from sentient beings to Buddhas. This true nature, which pervades everything, is the naturally luminous Buddha nature, primordially unfettered. Fettered means to like chain something or lock something up. Primordially unfettered by impurities. The reality of ultimate truth. So, to be able to recognize and settle in this, it's necessary to have gone through the, as it were, the detox of freeing ourselves from clinging to subject and object. To talk about subject and object in a way encapsulates all our clinging to conditioned phenomena as being real. It's precisely that clinging to conditioned phenomena, and therefore identifying real objects out there and a real me who's perceiving them, that has made us unable to recognize what is actually true, what is actually real. And what is actually true, what is actually real, and has always been so, is simply the Buddha nature itself. all the minds of all sentient beings are nothing other than this Buddha nature. And it is primordially unfettered by impurities. What he means is that although, relatively speaking, we might say the Buddha nature is covered by these false beliefs, this belief that they're truly existent entities, subject and object, actually they don't in fact exist. They are primordially empty. They never came into existence. So, in that sense, we've just kind of hypnotized ourselves, which is what ignorance does. We've hypnotized ourselves from beginningless time into believing in a fiction. To use a Yogacara term, the imaginary nature. We believe in something which is just not true at all. We apply the labels of subject and object, we project them onto reality, and imagine that they're really there. But they've never been there. Not the tiniest truly existent object, not the most subtle perceiving consciousness, none of them ever were there in the first place. Because as we realized through the common Madhyamaka analysis, no phenomena with intrinsic nature, with solidity, with true existence, could ever occur, could ever arise, could ever be produced. But while we cling to them as existent, we can't recognize what has always been there, which is none other than the Buddha nature. And that is ultimately real. That is ultimately true. The Buddha nature, empty of conditioned phenomena, empty of everything except its own nature, which is of course the meaning of the term Shentong, to be empty of other, literally, if we translate it into English. So, to sum up the teaching so far on this, Contra Lord Thaye says, the examination that establishes freedom from extremes is a necessary preliminary to this experience of union in which one remains in the authentic self-arising wisdom of reality. So, to be introduced to the Shentong view means to be able to recognize and settle in the self-arising wisdom of reality. What does that mean? Self-arising in this sense is simply a synonym for naturally present, always there, primordially present. So, not created by another, not even created for us by the Buddha, as it says in the Lama about the Buddha nature. It is about Buddhahood itself. It's not dependent on another because it is naturally present. So that is the meaning of the self-arising wisdom of reality. We've always had it. We've always had this wisdom because our mind is no other than the luminous Buddha nature. So it's not a wisdom that knows something in a dualistic sense, like I know an object, I know Delhi, or I know this football team, or I know this person. That's a knowledge that just arises through conditions. This is the knowledge that we've always had, the primordial wisdom. So therefore it's described here as self-arising. And it's authentic because it's not, because it's not dependent on any conditions. But, as Contra Lord Thaye is making clear here, we can't recognize the nature of our mind, the Buddha nature. We can't settle in it unless we've first done the, as it were, the negation. We've negated the fiction. We've stopped believing in the fiction that conditioned phenomena are truly existent. And we did that by following the common Madhyamaka analysis, which led us to the position beyond positions, freedom from extremes, no longer assigning true existence to any phenomena, because they cannot be found, but at the same time not then falling into the extreme of nihilism, of simply saying there's nothing, or there's true non-existence. So first we free ourselves from all such mistaken opinions, and what, as it were, the ground has been cleared, then we can be introduced to what has always been there, our Buddha nature. If the introduction in a way is made prematurely, without us having practiced, gone through the non-affirming negation teaching, the common Madhyamaka teaching, then we'll mistake the Buddha nature for a kind of Atman, a soul, a self, or indwelling God, or something of that kind, as we said yesterday. Anyway, Controller Thaye says, this emptiness, the emptiness of the necessary preliminary teaching, is called emptiness of conceptual clinging to elaborations. Which I've just mentioned, clinging to elaborations of things being truly existent or things being truly non-existent. So the common Madhyamaka, the Rangtong, plays that role in this teaching of helping us to cut through conceptual clinging to extremes. And this realization, the realization that follows that when we're introduced to the Buddha nature, is called realization by self-disclosing transcendental wisdom. Self-disclosing, here's a translation of Tibetan term rangrik, which literally means self-aware. But once again, the meaning is not, it's not talking about a self in the ordinary way, or neither is it that awareness is split into subject and object. The rangrik yeshi, the self-aware primordial, or self-disclosing, or self-recognizing primordial wisdom, is precisely that which is beyond duality. So it's not I knowing something, it's all conceptual activity is finished, and I'm in the real place, Buddha nature itself, which has always been there. And that's the real wisdom, the transcendental wisdom, precisely because there's no longer any clinging to the division of subject and object. As I say, it's not I knowing that things are empty. That's the wisdom of in the ordinary sense, the wisdom that the Madhyamaka allows us to come to. But it's what is beyond that, which is no longer dualistic and no longer conceptual. It's in a way mind recognizing itself. That's it. Or, to use that phrase, seeing your original face, seeing your original essence, but something you've always had, not something that was produced, not even by being introduced to the view or meditating on the view. You've always had it. So in this sense, the Shentong is after all the conceptual activity of analyzing emptiness and so on has been done. Then and only then can the Shentong view really be introduced. So that concludes Controller Thaye's explanation on what is to be understood. Now in the second part of presenting the view in accord with the sutra system, he's going to talk about what is to be practiced. So if you like, the meditation instructions. And they are divided by Control Thaye into three. Firstly, the preliminaries, and secondly, and that means general preliminaries, as you'll see. Secondly, the main part, and thirdly, conclusion. So it works like this. Control Thaye is going to, in a way, teach us from the very beginning, as if we are new to practice. So therefore, he has to start with the general preliminaries. Preliminaries which are, in fact, in one way, common to all systems of Dharma, because they dispel our grossest of errors. Okay, let's see what Control Thaye says for the general preliminaries. The stages of purifying the wish-fulfilling gem-like Buddha nature of the gross, subtle, and very subtle stains begins in accord with the 4 seals of the first turning of the wheel. Okay, let's unpack that. So he's introduced an analogy here of what we're doing in practicing meditation. We all possess, as we've just been told, the Buddha nature, which is like a wish-fulfilling gem. Because, of course, precisely because we possess this, all happiness that flows in samsara can arise, and the state of liberation can arise, and supreme Buddhahood can arise. So it's like a wish-fulfilling gem in which, in fairy tales, you request from the jewel all wishes to be granted. The Buddha nature can grant us all wishes. But right now, it's encrusted, it's covered over, like a jewel which has been completely covered over by extrinsic material, so that we perhaps can't even see it at all, that it is present. Yet if we could find it, it would grant us all our wishes. So, to practice in this system is to purify the wish-fulfilling gem, Buddha nature, of what covers it over. Here we refer to gross, subtle, and very subtle stains. Ranjan Dorji, Karmapa Ranjan Dorji, in his text, Nyingpo Tenpa, showing the Buddha nature, explains this in some detail. So there, Ranjan Dorji explains that the gross stains that cover the Buddha nature are what we refer to as the obscuration of the disturbing emotions. They're gross in the sense that they're most obvious, they're affecting us all the time, and also they're the easiest to remove. So the disturbing emotions of the 6 major disturbing emotions, the 20 minor disturbing emotions, desire, hatred, anger, pride, wrong view, doubt. These are the 6 major disturbing emotions. And in the Abhidharma, the 20 minor ones are also listed. They have to be removed. And the second obscuration has to be removed is the obscuration of cognition, that which is, in fact, our dualistic framework that we're constantly imposing upon reality. That's more subtle, it's more hidden. It's the basis for the 6 disturbing emotions to arise. It's the basis, for instance, for the 12 links of dependent origination to be set in motion. But it is much more subtle because it's about our whole view of reality. And then, the third and most subtle obscuration that Ranjan Dorji points to is the obscuration of meditation itself. That meditation can become, if we fall into mistaken modes of meditation, a very subtle obscuration, preventing us from clearly seeing the Buddha nature. So these obscurations have to be removed along the way. In fact, the first time we really seriously start to cut through the obscurations is when we reach the third path, the path of vision, the first Bodhisattva noble bhumi, the noble bhumi of joy. And then after that, we start to remove the more long-term imprints of those obscurations. The imprints of the obscuration of cognition are more difficult to remove than those of the disturbing emotions. And the imprints of the obscuration of meditation is the most subtle of all to be removed. So as we move along the bhumis, we remove them, thus revealing the natural presence of the Buddha nature. Because just like a jewel that's encrusted with foreign material, if you take the right agents, you gradually remove the encrustation. Again, Ranjan Dorji talks about this in some detail in the Ningpo Tempa. So that is what practice is for. Not for producing the Buddha nature, not for producing Buddhahood. It's already there, but simply removing everything which temporarily covers over it. Because those obscurations have no existence, real existence in themselves. They all come from false beliefs, incorrect thinking, as it describes it in the Jude Lama. So where do we start in cleaning the already naturally pure Buddha nature? And there already is a very important thing to understand. We need to clean the Buddha nature, but it's not dirty. We need to purify it, but it's not impure. But from where we are, as deluded sentient beings, it seems that way, and our obscurations function, relatively speaking, to prevent us realizing the Buddha nature. So we have to practice. We have to remove the obscurations. Even though at the end, what will be revealed will be what has always been there. The Buddha nature, as I quoted yesterday from Milarepa, also from Ranjan Dorji incidentally, they use the same passage. By the way, in Dharma we make a virtue of plagiarism. There is nothing new to be said. Anybody intelligent always just steals from the great masters before them. So Ranjan Dorji stole from Jetsa Milarepa when he said, "Wise Buddhas cannot improve it, foolish beings cannot damage it." And both of them are going back to the jewel ornament where it says about the Buddha nature, the same before as after. So even after you've done the practice, it's no different than it was before. It's the Buddha nature, complete with all qualities. But we begin to purify it, as Kantra Rinpoche says, by following through the teachings given in the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. We've already seen that because we used the 2nd turn of wheel teachings, common Madhyamaka, to lead up to introducing the Buddha nature, which was taught in the 3rd turn of the wheel. Here, for practice, we go back to the very first turning of the wheel. because in the first turning of the wheel, given by Lord Buddha, taught by Lord Buddha, the key teaching is what is known as the Four Seals. The Four Seals. A seal is something that guarantees authenticity. You can be confident that something is the order of the king if the king has sealed it, he's put his seal to it. So similarly, it is said that to authenticate whether a particular teaching, a particular presentation is indeed Buddhist, it must conform to the Four Seals. But more than that, the Four Seals summarize everything presented in the first turn of the wheel. And we use them as a way to correct our, as it were, the mistakes we initially bring to the path. It's like, as beginners, our way of looking at things, our way of looking at the world, is not actually aligned with the Buddha's teaching. We may, and probably do, entertain all kinds of deluded opinions from different ideologies, different religions, etc., etc. And so even though we may have become Buddhist by taking refuge in the Three Jewels, that is called becoming Buddhist by faith, we also need to become Buddhist by view. And that is done by aligning our thinking with the Four Seals. In short, we enter into the Dharma path genuinely by hearing about, reflecting, and meditating on the Four Seals. So, the first seal is expressed as all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. All conditioned phenomena are impermanent. Condition means arising from causes and conditions, and thus being contingent, dependent, not having own nature. And all conditioned phenomena are impermanent because they're momentarily produced just by the coming together of different causing conditions, which themselves will immediately separate. So the very causal basis for a phenomenon to appear is transient, is impermanent. So its product, the appearance, the phenomena that results, is also impermanent. And in fact, this impermanence is always happening. Everything is constantly changing. It's not like impermanence is one might understand, how one might understand it when someone says, well, something will exist for a long time and then finally it will finish. It's not like that. Our life is not like that. No phenomenon is like that. Even a pot or a cup is not like that. Everything is disintegrating momentarily. No sooner has the thing arisen through the combination of causing conditions, which themselves disappear immediately, so the phenomenon is mutating, is changing. So all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. This is expressed by Lord Buddha in a famous teaching known as the four ends, the four, as it were, destinations of all phenomena. There he says, Lord Buddha said, whatever is born will die. Whatever is gathered will be dispersed. Whatever is collected will be exhausted. Whatever is raised will fall. One could add so many, of course, further examples of the certainty of impermanence to these four, but they're immensely powerful. There's nothing excluded, nothing conditioned is excluded from these. Our life is here. This is our biography. Our biographies from life to life is contained within these four seals. The fate of countries and continents and planets, solar systems, is contained here. Your economy is sore point for us, of course, in Britain, is contained here. Your relationships are contained here. Your families are contained here. As Controller Thaye continues and adds to this verse, and Lord Buddha, all these conditioned phenomena are impermanent like bubbles or lightning. So you see, the thing is, up till now, we all have been living in denial of this. We cling to the idea that there are, even if some things are impermanent, other things are not impermanent. They will endure. This will last forever. Perhaps I realize my body won't, but maybe I think myself will, or my soul will. My soul will dwell in eternal life. Myself will be fused with God and therefore exist forever. Or my soul will go to heaven. Or whatever it is. Or even just the kind of casual belief in permanence that even materialists have, who don't believe in past and future lives, but who nevertheless take for granted that what they like and what makes them secure will always be around. But nothing will be. In fact, the very ground we're standing on is disintegrating as we talk. The very body that I rest in is disintegrating. My mind is moving from moment to moment. Nothing remains the same. So as he says, everything is like bubbles or lightning, two images of complete transience, of complete impermanence. But without acknowledging this reality, my mind will never turn to the Dharma. As Lord Manjushri said to Sachen Kungenipo, the great founding master of Sakya, Sedala Jampa Chupamin, if you have attachment to the things of this life, you're not a Dharma practitioner. So we may look like one ostensibly, we may have joined the club of Buddhism and so on, may even recite prayers or do practice. But if we're attached to the things of this life, Dharma has not really risen in us. We're just pretending. Only full acknowledgement of impermanence and therefore the certainty of death, etc., makes us a real Dharma practitioner. So that is the first seal. And then in the second seal, Lord Buddha has said, all contaminated phenomena are suffering. All contaminated phenomena are suffering. Contaminated means wherever there's a thought of self, it's therefore in a way biased or distorted or warped. Whatever action we do, even virtuous actions, when they're done with the thought of self as the doer and as the recipient of whatever outcome of that action may be, then that is a contaminated phenomenon. So even the good deeds we do, let alone the bad deeds that we do, are contaminated phenomena. And they cannot lead to anything other than samsaric results. They cannot lead to anything other than samsaric results. And the nature of samsara is, of course, none other than suffering. Whether it's the suffering of suffering, the obvious suffering, clearly manifest in the three lower realms, whether it's the suffering of change that we human beings characteristically and gods characteristically experience, or the most subtle suffering of conditionality inherent in clinging to our aggregates as real. Nobody goes beyond these three types of suffering as long as their actions and thoughts are contaminated by self-clinging. As Control Thaye says, in dependence upon grasping actions and disturbing emotions, grasping means grasping itself, of course, in dependence upon karma and disturbing emotions, one circles with the 5 aggregates such as form in the 3 realms. Through my ignorance that grasps at the notion of a personal self, disturbing emotions, desire, hatred, etc. rise in my mind. They stimulate karmic actions in order to grasp what I want, to defeat what I hate, and so on and so forth. And that shapes me. That shapes me as a certain type of being, a certain type of person. In short, it establishes my aggregates, the body that I take at the beginning of this life, followed by the feelings, perceptions, formations, and consciousness, the 4 mental aggregates. They're the product of karma and the disturbing emotions, which themselves rest upon ignorance. So it's like inevitably I'm in samsara because of this contamination. And Control Thaye describes now this circling in samsara. Like a bee trapped in a jar, one experiences the nature of suffering, movement in suffering, and containment by suffering. So, the nature of suffering refers here to the suffering of suffering, as we termed it, the basic suffering. The bee is circling in the jar. Sometimes he wants to get out, of course, but he can't. So sometimes he's so weighed down by negative karma and disturbing emotions, he's near the bottom of the jar. We could say the bottom of samsara, the three lower realms, where suffering is obvious. Whereas for us it's somewhat disguised. But in the hell and ghost and animal realm is no denying the nature of suffering through the ripening of negative karma. In fact, it's said about the suffering of suffering that the only happiness there is when it goes, when it ends. There's no other moment of happiness, so to speak, than that. I mean, of course, that's a poetic exaggeration because there seems to be some happiness and pleasure, for instance, in the animal realm, because the karma that leads you to a certain realm is twofold: propelling karma, which thrusts you into the realm, and completing karma, which, as it were, furnishes the fine details of your particular existence, your individual existence in that realm. But generally speaking, animal realm is still dominated by suffering. And he says the bee also experiences the movement in suffering. This refers to the suffering of change. The suffering of change that we have, born into the apparently fortunate realm of humans or gods, where there seems to be happiness, pleasure, and so on and so forth. But in fact, that's not really the case, precisely because it will pass. And in its passing, in its going, because the happiness that we experience is limited, it's created by karma, and therefore it's conditioned happiness. It will come to an end, it's bound to come to an end. And in its going, there will be suffering. So it's the opposite way round to the lower realms. There, the happiness is in its going. Here, in the high realms, the suffering is in the going of the passing of happiness. So even though the bee may think, I'm moving towards the exit by moving upwards in my jar, unfortunately for the poor bee, the jar is firmly shut. So he goes up to the bottom only to fall down again. Again, as it's said, like in the sutras, having been born as Brahma, Brahma, the chief god of the form realm, one will again be reborn in hell. When the karma that leads you to be reborn as Brahma is exhausted, then hell will follow. Or again, having been born in the human realm as a universal emperor, one will become the servant of a servant in the next life. So that is the suffering of change that afflicts the bee. I guess everybody's guessed already. We are the bee, of course. And then this containment by suffering refers to the underlying suffering, the suffering of conditionality, the suffering that's always present as soon as we cling to the 5 skandhas. Because clinging to the 5 aggregates produced continuously through our disturbing emotions, karma and ignorance, clinging to them as real, clinging to them as me, is a suffering in itself, because I'm clinging to that which can never give me any security, any stability. I'm going against reality. So it's like there's underlying the other sufferings is this fight between me and reality, embodied in my clinging to the skandhas. So wherever the bee goes, up, down, wherever he goes in the jar, he or she is contained by suffering. And that's our state. So to hear this, to hear the second seal teaching is so important for generating in us renunciation. Otherwise, we might think that the purpose of practicing the Dharma is simply to get a good rebirth, to go as a human being, or perhaps even in the God realms. But that's just the bee thinking that if he goes in a higher level in the jar, he'll have permanent happiness. He doesn't. Suffering will follow. Even the obvious suffering of the lower realms will follow when his positive karma is exhausted. So if impermanence makes us enter the Dharma, the thought of suffering makes us generate a longing for freedom, for liberation, for escape from samsara, without which our Dharma practice will be worldly, will remain fixed on worldly, temporary goals or results. And then the third seal, proclaimed by Lord Buddha, is all phenomena are selfless and empty. All phenomena are selfless and empty. As Contra Lord Thaye says, from form, the skandha of form, the body, up to omniscience, that quality of a Buddha, all phenomena of conventional truth are empty of accomplishment. Here, there's one kind of possible misleading, we could misinterpret here. In fact, the omniscience, from our point of view, Shentong, the true omniscience possessed by a Buddha is not produced, is not done, is not created through his efforts on the path. It is naturally, his wisdom is naturally present as a quality of the Buddha nature jewel, which is endowed with all qualities. But from the point of view of seeing omniscience as something created by you studying and practicing, reflecting, that omniscience would be a conditioned phenomena. So, in short, it's to say everything produced from conditions, all phenomena of conventional truth, as that which appear to be there, but when examined are not, are empty of accomplishment. Accomplishment here means, again, they've never been really produced. Accomplishment is to create something. So they've never been created, as we heard through the common Madhyamaka analysis yesterday. So all phenomena are empty and selfless. Selfless in the sense of not just empty of the personal self, but empty of any inherent nature as a phenomenon, which is, of course, a synonym for emptiness. So whatever it is that we may cling to as real, as true, as having solidity, is actually devoid of that solidity. Any teaching which proclaims, for instance, there is a true self, therefore, is contrary to this seal of the Buddhas, because wherever one looks in the five aggregates, which comprise the totality of all conditioned phenomena, of course, from body through to consciousness, one cannot find that truly existent entity whatsoever. Neither can one find any truly existent entity outside of the five aggregates, because the five aggregates comprise the totality of our conditioned experience. So to imagine that there's a self that is not the five aggregates, but is in relationship with them, is entirely fictitious, because where would it be, and how would it have any connection with our experience if it's not in the five aggregates? So all this is, as we established, by looking at the common Madhyamaka. But it refines our view, so that we're not, when it comes to the Buddha nature, we're not going to be imposing mistaken understanding upon it, such as that the Buddha nature is like an Atman or a soul or something. And then the fourth seal is proclaimed by Buddha as only nirvana is peace. Only nirvana is peace. So, in other words, you will not, with any lesser goal that you strive to achieve through your spiritual practice, you will not find the true cessation of suffering, which is truly real, the basis that is empty of all phenomena. Nirvana is none other than the Buddha nature, which is beyond samsara because it's empty of all conditioned phenomena. It cannot be confused with anything that's produced from causes and conditions, such as a self, such as any of the five skandhas, such as the disturbing emotions, such as karma. All those are absent in the Buddha nature. It's empty of them. It's empty even of subject and object, empty even of the 8 consciousnesses posited by the Chittamatrans. And therefore, it is the real nirvana, that which is naturally present and empty of everything other than its own nature. It's beyond the misery of temporary delusions. The misery arises through us clinging to the clouds rather than realizing our mind is the sky. We cling to the clouds of the 5 aggregates and the disturbing emotions, etc., of subject and object, rather than realizing our mind is space, sky. And therefore, because we cling to the clouds as real, we experience the misery of continual rebirth within samsara. But when we realize the true nature of our mind, the Buddha nature, that we can say is actually permanent. Not permanent in the sense that one may think one's body could be permanent or one's self could be permanent. Those are all conditioned phenomena. Having arisen, they will disappear. But that which has always been naturally present, the Buddha nature, can therefore be termed permanent. One can use this term. To say any conditioned phenomena is permanent is a erroneous view, one of the 4 erroneous views, as it's said. But about the Buddha nature, because it's unproduced, unconditioned, never arising, as any entity, we can use that term. It now is usable. Stable. Everything conditioned is unstable, continuously mutating, and through interaction with other conditioned phenomena. But the Buddha nature remains what it is. As I quoted earlier, the Buddha nature, the same before as after. It doesn't undergo any change. Our experience of it does. Right now, as beginners, we have no experience of it. As bodhisattvas on the path, we have a partial experience of it. As Buddhas, we have total experience. But the Buddha nature itself never changed in any of these three phases. So we can say about the Buddha nature, which is what nirvana really is, it's stable and pacified. Pacified meaning devoid of all agitation that leads to suffering. All that has come to an end because we're no longer clinging to the clouds as real. We've realized that which is real is the Buddha nature mind. So that is how we understand nirvana, the fourth seal in Shentong. So we have to study and reflect on those four seals as the general preliminaries for Shentong teaching. And as I say, that will prevent us misinterpreting the Shentong teaching. Control concludes that by saying, reflecting on that, one should recite, so like, as slogans we can train with. It's a proclamation of four seals, in fact. Conditioned phenomena are impermanent. Contaminated phenomena are suffering. All phenomena are selfless and empty. Nirvana alone is peace. Now he just mentions that if you wanted some more kind of extensive presentation of the preliminary teachings as your general preliminary for Shentong, he says, the common preliminaries found in the graduated path texts, the Lamrim texts, such as Takpotajin, composed by, of course, Gampopa, they provide, so like where you find the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma, Lodonamshi. These common preliminaries found in the graduated path texts provide a more extensive presentation. So you could equally use those Lodonamshi, the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma, as your common or general preliminaries. So, of course, there's a great deal of overlap anyway between the four seals and the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma. But he concludes by saying, make sure that you really take this to heart. In other words, it's really got to be done. For instance, on the necessity of taking the preliminary teachings to heart, like the four thoughts, the great master Zapata Rinpoche says, unless the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma have truly arisen in your heart, to hear other teachings like Dzogpa Khenpo would just be to waste them. So that is Patrul Rinpoche's point about the necessity of even those who aspire to Dzogchen need to meditate on the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma. And as Patrul Rinpoche was the outstanding Dzogchen master of the 19th century, I think one cannot discount his advice, even though you can probably tune into the internet in 10 minutes and find somebody giving you the secret teachings of Dzogchen. Except they're not giving you the secret teachings of Dzogchen, it's just fiction. Like everything on that system. It's all part of the imaginary. Luckily, the internet, Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. Bezos, etc., all part of the imaginary nature. Luckily. We're also, of course, too. So that concludes the general preliminaries. So now we start the main point, the main part of the teaching for the meditating the Shentong view. This will be divided into four more divisions. First of all, taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. So why? Because here he's now going to, as it were, sketch an outline of the session of meditating on the view. So the general preliminaries are like for us to study and reflect and meditate on in our own time, much as we can. But then when we're ready to do the meditation, then this is the structure of the session. First, there will be the specific preliminaries for the session, which are, as always, taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. Second, settling in the unelaborated non-conceptual state. Third, the introduction to the Buddha nature. And fourth, the subsequent stage, the post-meditation stage, how you, as it were, go back into everyday life, having meditated on the view. So the first is the preliminaries of taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. So if one asks what is the purpose to make them the specific preliminaries for the session, well, the answer is that taking refuge is what makes a practice Buddhist. Taking refuge in the three jewels is what is our beginning of entering onto the Buddhist path. It separates us from those who are following other paths or no paths at all. So we remind ourselves of that we are entering into the Buddhist path by taking refuge at the beginning of all practices. As I say, without that, it's not a Buddhist practice. It could be anything, but it's not a Buddhist practice. And we take refuge in the common objects of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, of course, and we take refuge with the motivation of faith or confidence in the qualities. We begin with fear, I should say. We take refuge with fear that we need protection from the sufferings of samsara. Secondly, with faith, confidence in the qualities of the three jewels to indeed give that protection from suffering. And if we aspire to enter into the Mahayana, we also invoke compassion as part of our approach or motivation for taking refuge. Not that we can directly do anything yet for others, but we feel that they should be included in our act of taking refuge. So in short, if the object are the three jewels for taking refuge, the motivations are fear, faith, and compassion. That's the general point. But here Controller Thaye will give this a kind of specific Shentong flavor, this taking of refuge. So it does not contradict that general presentation of what are the three objects and what are the three ingredients of correct motivation, but now gives it a Shentong twist or flavor, as I said. So he says, since it is the uncommon path of the Mahayana, the very uncommon path of Mahayana, the path of the Mahayana taught in the third turning of the wheel sutras, not just the second turning, but the third turning of the wheel. Since it's the uncommon path of the Mahayana, one takes refuge in this following way. So now he's going to give us a refuge prayer, which is actually a passage from the Lankavatara Sutra, one of the great sutras from the third turning of the wheel, which, according to our tradition, Mahayana tradition, was delivered by Lord Buddha when he visited Sri Lanka. It seems to have been forgotten in Sri Lanka that Lord Buddha visited there and delivered the Lankavatara Sutra. Sri Lanka now is, of course, preeminently a Theravada nation, but this is our belief as Mahayanas. So in the Lankavatara, there's the following passage, and Controller Thaye is saying, this is how we should take refuge. The intrinsically luminous mind, the blissful Buddha nature, the causal basis of beings, these are all synonyms, by the way, pointing to the same reality, is free of limit and limitlessness. So all of them, intrinsically, the naturally luminous mind, that which is beyond subject and object, and therefore luminous, is our mind, the Buddha nature. And the Buddha nature is blissful. It is the source of the unconditioned bliss of freedom from samsara. The causal basis of beings, meaning that it's the causal basis for Buddhahood that exists even now, even in suffering, deluded sentient beings like ourselves, without which, if it didn't exist in sentient beings already, Buddhahood would be impossible. It's free of limit and limitless. Limit would mean something impermanent. Well, it's not conditioned, so it can never end. But at the same time, it's not eternal, in the sense of something that was produced and then endures forever. So the Buddha nature is beyond the two, eternalism and annihilation. Anyway, the passage continues, just as the color of gold and gold filaments in bronze can be seen by cleaning them, in the same way this element, this Buddha nature, exists within the aggregates and sentient beings. So sentient beings are like the impure material within which the Buddha nature exists, like pieces of gold within some kind of ordinary rock or some kind of ordinary iron, and therefore can be realized by practicing the path, described here as cleaning. The Buddha is without self and without aggregates. This inexhaustible primordial wisdom is eternal peace. I take refuge in it. So in other words, the final object of refuge is, as Karmapa says in the jewel ornament, the Buddha. There he says it's the final object of refuge because the Buddha possesses the Dharmakaya, therefore contains the Dharma jewel. And it is what the Buddha Dharma is what the Sangha turn their mind towards and depend upon. So in that sense, all three jewels are contained in the Buddha, precisely because the Buddha is the Buddha nature. Knowing that the Buddha is the eternal peace, the true nirvana, that is what we're taking refuge in, actually, when we take refuge in the three jewels. This is the meaning of the passage from the Lankavatara. And then to generate bodhicitta, so the second of the preliminaries for the session is, as always, generating bodhicitta. And the reason, the ordinary, to start with, the general reason for generating bodhicitta as a preliminary to our practice, in any practice, is that just as taking refuge marks us as a Buddhist and marks the practice as Buddhist, so generating bodhicitta marks us as a Mahayanist, one who has entered on the Bodhisattva path. And so therefore, any practice we do that begins with bodhicitta is a Mahayana practice, done with the goal of achieving Buddhahood for the benefit of others. So consequently, if we do not generate bodhicitta at the beginning of a practice, the practice may be Buddhist, but it could be just a Hinayanist practice, leading only to Shravaka or Hinayana goals. So that is the general reason for generating bodhicitta as aspiration, I wish to become a Buddha for others, and application, I will practice the path that leads to this. Because bodhicitta always includes these two phases, just as Shantideva has taught us in chapter 1 of Bodhicharyavatara. Anyway, here Control Lord Thaye is going to give the bodhicitta prayer a Shentong flavor by again quoting from Lankavatara. So he says, so 5 lines in this. The first 4 lines represent the aspiration phase, so to speak, generating that resolve to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of others. And the 5th and final line represents that application phase, or entry phase, sometimes people translate it, where you say, well, now I'll undertake the practices that will lead me to Buddhahood for others. So, this is a passage from the Lankavatara. The naturally luminous mind arises simultaneously with the self and the disturbing emotions, such as the manas. This has been well proclaimed by the supreme teaching. Therefore, I will meditate on the supreme path. So, the first 4 lines. Our aspiration to Buddhahood is presented here as aspiring to realize the Buddha nature itself, which is naturally present, naturally luminous, because free of subject and object, and has always been here. So although since beginningless time, I've been dominated by the simultaneously arising ignorance that arises with every moment of experience, and therefore it's called simultaneously arising, an ignorance which makes me project the idea of a self that really is nothing more than a fiction. The Buddha nature, the natural luminous, pure mind has been there all the time. Just like no matter how many clouds there are, beneath the clouds the sky is naturally pure and unstained. So the Buddha nature is there at all times. No matter how much I'm clinging to this fiction of self, no matter how much the disturbing emotions of desire, hatred, ignorance, and so on are arising because of my clinging, and the manas, the 7th of the 8 consciousnesses described in the Lankavatara and other sutras as being that aspect of temporary mind, temporary consciousness, which grasps at the base consciousness, the alaya, as mine, and grasps at the sense consciousnesses as mine. So it is the kind of egoic consciousness. So although that samsaric mechanisms are happening, clinging to self, to manas, the emotions firing up, and so on, the Buddha nature remains naturally present, naturally pure. So that is, in aspiring to realize Buddhahood, that is what I'm aspiring to realize, that which is my already present, unconditioned nature, the Buddha nature. This has been well proclaimed, this point has been well proclaimed by the supreme teaching. So in reciting this, I encourage myself to indeed realize the Buddha nature. And I commit to practicing that which will lead me to realize the Buddha nature. When I say, therefore I will meditate on the supreme path. So that is the verse for generating bodhicitta, the wish to realize Buddhahood for benefit of all in this presentation. So Control says, recite these, meaning the refuge and bodhicitta, with attention to their meaning. Of course, he would say that. So that concludes the preliminaries for the session. So I think now we will pause. There may be some questions, or may not, we shall see. But because from after this we go into the main session of practice, which is going to be divided into 2 stages. So that will take us quite some time to go through. So it's better, I think, to break now for questions or just for lunch. and continue tomorrow, if that's okay. No. Don't try and exorcise me.
Dear Lama, thank you for other amazing teaching. I still can't figure out what's the Buddha nature. I have impression this is something like a white canvas.
Like I say?
Like white canvas. White canvas for painting. It's a metaphor. Like white fabric for canvas.
Sorry, I can't. Sorry?
For painting.
Oh, white canvas. I see. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's not the correct metaphor. So if you could give us a better metaphor to understand. Thank you.
The jewel in rock or encrusted with foreign material. It's always been there. So all you need to do is remove that which is foreign to it, and you don't need to make the jewel any better. You don't need to paint the jewel. You don't need to add ornaments to it. It's got everything you need already present. So that is, I think, a very good analogy or metaphor for the Buddha nature. The jewel within, like some kind of ordinary metal. So at first, when you look at it, you think, oh, it's just ordinary metal. There's nothing there. But when you remove the covering, then there is the Buddha nature utterly complete. So with your mind, it is none other than the Buddha nature, just like a jewel. All the qualities that you want to develop, compassion, wisdom, etc., they're already in you. They're already naturally present. So this is the point of the Buddha nature teaching, to give us that confidence, we might say. So, for instance, in the Jude Lama, and we'll come to this, that's why I keep saying, we'll come to it, we'll come to it. In the Jude Lama, for instance, there are 9 analogies for the Buddha nature, how the Buddha nature exists in us right now, even though we don't see it. So, we will get there. You can hear those 9 analogies then. But for now, perhaps this jewel, this wish-fulfilling jewel that was mentioned earlier, is the best analogy. That's it.
Dear Lama, I want to make sure I understand well the last sentences or last part of today's teaching about generating bodhicitta through this Lankavatara verses.
Yes.
Because on the first glance, it looks, well, selfish in a way.
Yes.
I want to generate Buddha nature and go to the path. Do I understand it well that the bodhicitta part is implied by the Buddha nature, which is
exactly.
really... Yeah.
I mean, that's why I started off in both refuge and bodhicitta by briefly mentioning the general or common understanding of refuge and bodhicitta in the general Mahayana. So Contra Lord Thaye is assuming that you'll bring that with you to when you do this recitation, because otherwise you'll not be getting the point of it. Yeah, that's very true. It's very important to understand. Yeah, you're not trying to realize the Buddha nature for yourself, but you're just having the confidence it's there to be realized. But of course, why are you doing this? To become a Buddha for the benefit of others.
I want to ask the question. You mentioned you mentioned the Dakpo Targyen is a Lamrim text.
Yes, it is.
And
yes.
the Kechuk.
Kechuk is not a Lamrim.
It's not Lamrim.
No, not a. Kechuk is like a compendium of all things. So no, the Lamrim is means a systematic step-by-step presentation of the path. Rim means like stages, and Lam, of course, is path. And that's a particular style of teaching which was brought to Tibet by Atisha, and who wrote a text called The Lamp of the Path of Enlightenment. This is the first Lamrim taught in Tibet, and many others followed. So like Karmapa's Tajen, which he dedicates to Atisha, of course, as well as Milarepa, is like a Kaju version of that. So yeah, Lamrims exist in all traditions under different titles, but they're all this working the path from the very beginning to the end. Yeah. I mean, of course, a lot of the stuff that's in the Kenjuk you will find in the jewel ornament, but it's not arranged in such a way. Kenjuk is an entry into the knowledge of all Dharma teachings.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have two questions regarding the 4 seals.
Yeah.
The first one is the second seal that says contaminated phenomena are suffering.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning that even virtuous actions cannot lead to anything but samsaric results. And obviously I was thinking that how about accumulating merit even though we are not free from self-clinging?
It's contaminated merit then. It's contaminated merit, and therefore it can lead you to have a rebirth as a human being or as a god, but it doesn't free you from samsara. Because when I do those virtuous actions, still, of course, I'm thinking, I'm doing this, and I'm going to get the result of that. Even if I know I shouldn't, the attachment to self is so great that I contaminate the goodness in the action I contaminate. So it's like spoiled. Not entirely, it's still going to produce some good result for me, but that good result will not be outside of samsara. It will be just like, you've got enough money now to upgrade from level 4 in the prison to level 2 in the prison. That's it.
Thank you. And the second one is regarding the third.
Yeah.
All phenomena are selfless and empty.
Yeah.
So this is supposed to be common to all the Buddhist schools of thoughts. And I was thinking about the Theravada, Vaibhashika, and Sautantrika, that they assert the existence of smallest particles and shortest instance. So it's not contradicting?
Yeah, well, actually, the great master Lopon Sonasemo discusses this point in the Judici Namsha, which I'll shortly be teaching in Kundroling in the Bost. Anyway, advertisement's over. They says, yes, we have to concede that the Shravaka school are asserting a kind of intrinsic self for phenomena, but at least they get part of emptiness right. And even the Chittamatrins, too, are asserting that the mind, the basis of all, is an intrinsically existent entity. So once again, they've got some emptiness, more than the Shravakas, in fact, but not all of it. So we'll allow them in under this heading, because at least they have some emptiness, some non-self, whereas the non-Buddhists don't have any at all. But it's a good point that needs clarifying, yes. That's very good.
Hello, thank you for your explanations again. My question is related to the metaphor again about Buddha nature, the gem, the very special gem. That is covered by some obscurations or
impurities.
Yeah. And my question is, these impurities, they, I suppose, are subject to change, so to impermanence.
Yeah, look at us. Our opinions are changing all the time.
Exactly.
You know.
Then the question is, if they are bound to time, so they will eventually dissolve by themselves.
No.
Okay, that's the question.
No,
yes.
Because like Gampopa says at the beginning of Tajen, samsara is notorious for not ending by itself. So even though there is no samsara, there's nothing to it, we have to make an effort to remove it. And we call this the double purity. That is to say, the Buddha nature is naturally pure, but we have to go through the procedure of the path to seemingly purify it of the foreign elements, the incidental impurities. So yes, otherwise we would conclude from this teaching that we're already naturally enlightened. There's nothing to do. This is a great, obstacle for that could arise through misunderstanding this teaching. So it's good to raise these questions. But no, even though the defilements and the mistaken views are all unreal, they just keep perpetuating themselves.
How do they do this?
Because through dependent origination. Why am I stupid today? Because I was stupid yesterday. It creates the karma that impels me, that pushes me to be stupid again, to misread it again, to misread the world again and again. Of course, if I stopped and looked at reality in this very moment, I would interrupt the chain of transmission of ignorance. That is why meditation works, because one can interrupt this transmission. But that transmission is so powerful. It's been going on since beginningless time. It's like a huge force, like a rushing river behind, impelling me to keep repeating mistake after mistake after mistake. It's like the guy in a bar singing a sad song after his latest love affair was broken up, asking himself, I'm never going to fall for that again. The waitress comes in, she's got long white shiny legs, he falls for her right again, and the whole thing fires up once more. He's going to be back in the bar the next night singing another sad song. That's us. That's us.
Thank you.
Just listen to country music. It'll tell you a lot. Okay.
Dear Lama, Jampa, Thaye, when I listen to you, there happen two things at the same time. There's a very huge amount of inspiration, but also kind of being desperate, because if we are only Dharma practitioners, if we don't cling to anything anymore, it sounds very radical approach. It came to my mind that it's in a way similar to commit suicide. Yeah.
To suicide?
Yes. And I feel everything if I kind of try to change a little bit up to now, it won't be sufficient anyway. So maybe you have any advice?
Yes. You see, it's almost like we're needlessly worrying. We're worrying without any reason to worry. We have the world is, if we could relate to it as it is, without our distorted vision, we would find that we and other beings are full of love and compassion and wisdom and life and beauty and meaning and power. So in fact, to stop clinging is to say, you're worried about things that are unnecessary because they're just fictional. Why don't you awaken to life as it really is in its true beauty? So it's like that's the message of the teaching. It's that extraordinarily positive one. It's like the child, The child has a beautiful room and many beautiful things in it, but he believes that under the bed there's a monster. So he's frightened to go in the room and play with his toys. He's frightened to take his friends into the room because of this monster that's underneath the bed. So he becomes obsessed with that and fearful. But if his parents can just show him carefully, there's no monster. What is more, there's never been any monster there. It's not been there ever at all. He will discover joy and happiness and contentment in his room. So we're clinging to monsters, and that's why we're unhappy, and that's why we don't live properly and fully. That is the point of the not clinging. We're just saying, don't cling to monsters. They were never there in the first place. I think final question is over here. Yeah.
Thank you. So yesterday in the text there was a passage about, as far as I understood, like wrong way of practicing Mahamudra.
Yes.
By looking like into the gap between the souls.
Yeah.
And as far as I heard before, it is like rather popular instruction in the Kagyu lineage, like to look between the souls, behind the souls, like searching for so-called basic mind, or Tamal Gishepa.
Control Lodrota is not criticizing the Kagyu instruction, of course he's the master of Kagyu, just saying that don't get caught up in overemphasizing the stillness, the nyepa, in between the jua, the moving thoughts. That will be your problem. In fact, you have to realize, as in that instruction, both the moving thought and the stillness are none other than Rigpa. That is the point. So that's all he's saying.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we conclude for this morning, and then return tomorrow. Fresh and hopefully, if my friends with the loud radio are kind, we'll all return fresh tomorrow for more of the Shentong teaching. Sunam di thamshi sikpai ne tobe ne pe dranam pamchi chiga nachi bala drupaye sipe sole drowa sho.